All right, so today we're going to take a deep dive into some recent political commentary and news about the upcoming election.
Okay.
And one thing that's been particularly interesting is all this talk about the blue wall, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, and whether or not these states that have typically voted Democrat might flip this time around.
Yeah, that's definitely been a big topic of conversation this election cycle.
Yeah, for sure. And it's not just like speculation either. There are reports of some serious concern within the Democratic Party, particularly around Kamala Harris's campaign strategy. What seems to be throwing a lot of people off is that she's decided to campaign in Texas, which is a reliably red state, instead of focusing all her energy on shoring up the blue wall.
Right.
So, yeah, it seems a little counterintuitive.
It does seem like a curious move on the surface, yeah. To understand why this is causing such a stir, we need to look at the history of these blue wall states. They've consistently voted for the Democratic presidential candidate for decades now, from 1992 all the way to 2020, with the exception of 2016, of course, when Trump won.
Right. So you can see why a potential shift away from the Democrats in these states is making people nervous.
Yeah, for sure. It's like the ground is shaking under what was once considered solid footing for the Democrats. And some of the comments that are coming out from within the Democratic Party are pretty telling. One anonymous source actually told the New York Post, and this is a quote, "They are not thinking blue wall at all. They are just not electing the blue wall." So what do you make of that?
Well, it certainly suggests a lack of confidence from that anonymous source in those traditionally Democratic strongholds. The big question is why? Is this a genuine concern that these states are actually slipping away from the Democrats? Or is it a reflection of maybe a different campaign strategy altogether? Perhaps they believe that they could afford to lose one of these blue wall states if they can manage to flip a traditionally Republican state like Texas.
Right.
It's certainly a risky gamble,
Right.
but it could potentially pay off big time for them. Yeah, it's a gamble that has some Democrats pretty worried, though. A senior Harris campaign official told NBC News that there's concern that either Michigan or Wisconsin will, quote, fall off. So they're definitely not taking this lightly.
Right. I mean, and it's not just about those individual states either, right? Losing even one piece of the blue wall could have a ripple effect across the whole election. Those states hold a significant number of electoral votes, and losing those votes could really damage the Democrats' chances of winning the presidency.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, okay, the Harris campaign is pushing back against this narrative, though. They're saying that she is campaigning in those states.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Right.
that's true. But the question is how much and with what level of focus? Are these just quick visits for appearances? Or are these genuine, concerted efforts to make sure that they secure those states? This trip to Texas definitely raises some questions about where the campaign's priorities really lie.
That's a good point. Speaking of priorities, John Fetterman, the current lieutenant governor of Pennsylvania, has been really emphasizing how important he thinks his state is in this election. He's been saying that Pennsylvania is essential for either candidate to win. He even said, quote, "Whoever wins Pennsylvania wins this." So do you think he's overstating the importance of Pennsylvania?
Don't necessarily think so. While it's impossible to say for sure what's going to happen, Pennsylvania is certainly a key battleground state in this election. It's a pivotal part of that blue wall. And its electoral votes carry a lot of weight. If the Democrats were to lose Pennsylvania, their path to victory becomes much more difficult.
Right. So we've got Democrats worried about the blue wall crumbling, and we've got John Fetterman basically sounding the alarm bells in Pennsylvania. What about the Republicans? Where do they stand in all of this?
Well, from the sources you've provided, one key takeaway from the Republican side seems to be the importance of focusing on those swing states and not taking any victory for granted. They're not just assuming that they have it in the bag. They're actively campaigning in these states, recognizing that every vote matters.
So it sounds like both sides are really aware of just how close this race could be.
Yeah.
Especially in these blue wall states.
Yeah, exactly. And that makes those states even more fascinating to watch. I mean, they're like microcosms of the larger political landscape in the country right now. And what happens in those states could very well determine the outcome of the entire election.
It's interesting to see what happens.
It is.
That's for sure.
Yeah. It's interesting. We're seeing all this uncertainty about the blue wall. And that uncertainty seems to be reflected in both parties' strategies. Like, they're not treating those states as a sure thing anymore.
Yeah, it's like everyone's holding their breath, waiting to see which way they're going to swing.
Right.
So let's try to dig a little deeper into this. Like, what could actually cause these blue wall states to flip?
Okay, well, there are a lot of factors at play here. One of the big ones is always economic anxiety. You know how people are feeling about their own financial situations and the state of the economy in general? That can really influence how they vote.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, like, if people are feeling like they're being squeezed financially,
Mm.
they might be more open to change.
Exactly. They might be looking for someone new to lead the country, someone who they think can improve their economic situation. And then you also have to consider the social issues that are motivating a lot of voters these days. Things like abortion rights and gun control. Especially in these really tight races, these issues can really get people fired up into the polls.
Yeah, it seems like party loyalty might not be as strong as it used to be.
You're right. We're seeing a rise in the number of independent voters who aren't really tied to either party. They're more likely to be swayed by specific issues or even just the personalities of the candidates. And that makes it even harder to predict how they're going to vote.
Right. Yeah, it's like trying to read tea leaves, except the tea leaves are constantly changing shape.
That's a great analogy. And then on top of all of that, we have to think about the ground game of each campaign. All those behind the scenes efforts to get people registered to vote, to keep them informed about the candidates, and then actually get them out to vote on election day. That stuff is really crucial, especially in states like these where the margins are probably going to be razor thin.
So it's not just about those big speeches and the debates. It's about all that nitty-gritty work that happens behind the scenes to get people to actually cast their ballots.
Exactly. It's all about getting people to the polls.
Okay, so we've got economic worries, we've got those really hot-button social issues, a growing number of independent voters, and then this intense focus on the ground game. It's a lot to keep track of. But I guess, what does it all mean for the average voter? Like, why should they care about all of this?
That's a great question. And I think the biggest takeaway here is that your vote matters more than ever. These swing states are going to be incredibly close, and literally every single vote could make a difference. So do your research, get informed about the candidates, figure out where they stand on the issues that matter to you, and most importantly, make sure you get out there and vote.
Yeah, I definitely second that. Your vote is your voice.
Yeah.
And it's super important to use it, especially in this election.
Couldn't agree more. This election's going to be close. Every vote will count. Don't underestimate the power of your individual vote.
So we've talked a lot about the potential for these blue wall states to flip. But what about the other side of that? What about the possibility of them holding strong? Like, what would need to happen for those states to stay blue?
That's a great question. Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in all the talk about potential upsets and everything, but it's definitely possible that the blue wall could hold firm. There are a few scenarios that could lead to that.
Okay, so what are those scenarios?
Well, one possibility is that those economic anxieties that we've been talking about, maybe they're not as widespread or as intense as some people think. If voters feel like the economy is generally headed in the right direction, that could actually benefit the incumbent party and help them hold on to those blue wall states.
So a strong economy could be a big advantage for the Democrats.
Potentially, yeah. If voters feel like their wallets are doing okay, they might be less likely to vote for change.
Interesting. Okay. So what else could help the blue wall stay strong?
Another factor could be the mobilization of certain groups of voters. For example, if young people or minority voters turn out in large numbers, that could really benefit the Democrats. Those groups tend to lean more towards the Democratic Party.
Right, so voter turnout, especially among certain demographics, could be really key here.
Absolutely. And, it's not just about the raw numbers of people voting. It's about who those people are. The composition of the electorate can have a huge impact on the outcome.
Right, that makes me think about all those ground game efforts we were just talking about.
Sure.
It's not just about getting people to vote. It's about getting the right people to vote.
Exactly. And that's where things get really strategic. Campaigns need to figure out who their target voters are, what motivates those voters, and then they have to tailor their messages and their outreach to appeal to those voters.
It's like a giant game of chess, except the pieces are voters and the board is the electoral map.
That's a great way to put it. And the stakes are incredibly high. I mean, the future direction of the country is literally on the line.
Okay, so we've got the economy, we've got voter demographics, and then the effectiveness of the ground game. All of those things could play a role in the fate of the blue wall. Is there anything else we should consider? So we've talked about a lot of different factors here, economic anxieties, shifting demographics. Is there anything else that could really influence whether or not this blue wall stands or falls?
There's one more factor that I think is important to mention. It's a little bit harder to measure, but it can be incredibly influential. And that's the overall political climate. Things like the national mood, the level of trust in institutions, the general sense of optimism or pessimism that people are feeling. All of that can really affect how people vote.
So you're saying that, like, even if the economy is doing well, if there's this, like, underlying sense of unease or discontent in the country, that could still hurt the incumbent party.
Exactly. Elections are about more than just policies and platforms. They're also about emotions, perceptions, gut feelings. And those less tangible factors can be just as powerful as any concrete issue.
Yeah, that's a good point. It really highlights how complex and unpredictable elections can be. It's like trying to predict the weather. There are just so many variables at play.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And just like the weather, there are always surprises in store. That's what makes elections so captivating and also so nerve-wracking.
Well said. Um, I think we've done a pretty good job of exploring both sides of this. You know, the potential for the blue wall to crumble and also the factors that could help it stay strong. So what do you think? What stands out to you as like the most important takeaway from all of this?
That's a good question. I think the main thing that we've really uncovered here is just how dynamic and unpredictable our political landscape is right now. There's no easy answer to the question of whether the blue wall will hold or not.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that we're living in a time of really significant political change. And the outcome of this election could have a huge impact on the direction of the country.
Absolutely. And I think it really underscores the importance of staying engaged and informed and involved in the political process.
Couldn't agree more. We can't just sit back and watch this unfold. We need to participate, have these conversations, make our voices heard.
Exactly. Every vote, every voice makes a difference.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive into the blue wall, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought-provoking question. Given all the uncertainty surrounding these states
Mhm.
and, the potential for them to either hold strong or swing in a completely different direction,
Yeah.
what do you think is going to happen?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I think it's important for everyone to consider, the historical context, the current political climate,
Hmm.
and all those potential impacts of shifting voter demographics as they form their own predictions.
Yeah, think about everything we've discussed today. The economic factors, those hot-button social issues, all those ground game efforts, and that, kind of intangible but really powerful national mood. How do you think all those pieces are going to fit together come Election Day?
Yeah, and maybe even more importantly, what role do you want to play in shaping that outcome?
That's a perfect note to end on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the blue wall and all the forces that could shape its destiny.
It's been my pleasure. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.
And don't forget to vote.